Welcome back, folks. It's time for our second talk of the day, and I am going to be joined by the one and only Raffaele to talk to us about DevOps automation for the Lazies, which actually sounds perfect for me, as I'll find myself being a bit of a lazy person. Only problems I feel like I should be taking notes, Raffaele, but once again, I'm lazy, so I guess I'll just have to listen to you closely.
Yeah, sure. So, good morning, everyone. I am Raf. I'm a solution architect at AWS. And today I will show you kind of a mix, right? So we're going to have a bit of slides, a bit of coding, and we're going to look at CDK, our cloud development kit used to build infrastructure with code. So I like to start the session with this sentence, which I personally love it, from Ken Thompson. And of course, one of my most productive days was throwing away 1,000 lines of code. That's a bit extreme, but the meaning here is, as DevOps, often we spend time in maintaining very verbose script built with YAML or with other declarative languages. And majority of the time today, it's spent by DevOps in maintaining all this code. So what I call builders, so actually those roles like DevOps, developers that we build things, and I like to include myself into this category. Usually we struggle with three different challenges, especially when we are dealing with big organization. So the first one is best practices. So in which term best practices? Here is like very often when you are inside a large organization, you need to understand the interconnectivity between services, between infrastructure, and you want to have somehow a sort of best practice repository, a kind of a best practice wiki, where you can point also to new joiners of your team or to other teams. How can I create two virtual machines with a load balancer? How can I create a database? Or how can I create a public DNS? And that's one of the first challenge. And the majority of the reason behind being a challenge is the lack of the complexity of creating a documentation that is a blueprint. So documentation that in reality, it's up to date to the best practice of the company. The second one is the speed. I don't want to mention any tool specifically for CI/CD, but usually most of the tools use YAML. So the problem is when we want to create a new CI/CD pipeline, we spend most of the time in creating and formatting YAML file in order to be compliant and running. So that's where the speed is affected. And as you know, YAML, you copy paste something from the web, then there is a space left, a space minus, and the whole thing doesn't work, and you need to figure it out. The third part is the pattern. So often, especially in large organizations that are approaching a cloud journey, you will always go into the same pattern. It can be a microservices application where you have multiple web endpoint and a database and an object storage, or it can be just a set of virtual machine or Kubernetes cluster. So usually the steps are always the same. They become repetitive. So you would like to have a pattern that you can simply drag, change a few parameters, use it, and deploy it within a few minutes, right? So the pattern and the speed, actually, they are interconnected. Then, now let's see a bit more on this issue. So usually when a customer approach a cloud journey, what they do is here, of course, I make the example of AWS, but can be also with other cloud providers. So AWS offer more than 200 services. And what they do is they want to somehow centralize a service catalog. Let's make the example of EC2, the virtual machine of AWS. There are many sites, there are many configurations. So usually the customer has a central DevOps team, and they try to somehow reinvent the wheel. So they take the service from AWS, then they build on top what they call module pattern. And usually languages could be YAML, could be CloudFormation, so the native YAML/JSON of AWS, or they can use Terraform, right? Just to make some example. Now, the problem there is that this central team tried to create patterns, but the problem with the pattern is that you need to be able to provide a pattern that make all your consumer happy. So then you will start to blow up the pattern with parameters, because someone want to have multiple virtual machine size, someone want to be able to choose different region or different availability zone, someone want to put in there a schedule because they want to shut down the virtual machine if it's not a working day, and so on, right? So then at this point, what happened is there is a breaking point where the central dev team is going to kind of a federated pattern. So they go to the application team and say, well, we want to be more agile. So we want that you become responsible for the patterns. So we want that you become able to manage and announce those patterns by yourself. But here is actually the challenge. Now, the DevOps team is speaking YAML, declarative language. But maybe the development team is speaking JavaScript, or is speaking Python, or is speaking Java language, right? Or .NET. And here is like the federation, instead of speeding up the adoption and the creation of those patterns, is slowed down, because now you're forcing the whole organization to go into this declarative way of creating resources on the cloud. So here we come. CDK. So what is CDK? CDK is actually a development kit that has been designed thinking in development first. So the idea here is to go to developers and give to them a familiar environment. So first of all, in this slide, you can see, I will show you also on the demo, is Visual Studio Code, right? One of the most used editors for code. So you can have IntelliSense. So IntelliSense is actually a way where a developer starts to type code, and the IDE, the Visual Studio Code, for example, we show you, hey, you have these options, you have these parameters. So an inline documentation that is interactive with you. Then it's familiar, because now I am a Node.js developer. That's my background. So if you give me something in JavaScript or TypeScript, I don't really need to read the documentation. I understand the language, I can go through. But if you give me YAML, first of all, I have to figure out what is YAML, right? And if I go specifically to a product like Terraform, then I have to open the documentation of Terraform and understand the API of Terraform in YAML. So the parameters, the naming convention, you name it. Third part, very important, is the abstraction. So now I'm a developer, I'm using JavaScript, and I keep that abstraction layer from AWS services. So I don't need to know any more specific details of, for example, an S3 bucket or a Lambda function. I have my parameters that are self-descriptive. They tell me actually what that means, and I can continue that way. Today, CDK offer 6 major languages, which is C# for .NET developers, Python, of course, JavaScript/TypeScript, depending from which school you're coming, Java, and Go. And this should cover majority of the developer. Of course, there are many other programming languages that can be introduced in CDK, but it is trying to cover like the majority of the language spoken. How does it work? So just a second. All right, so how does it work, CDK? So you have your project, which is built with the CDK CLI. And in my example, I'm using JavaScript/TypeScript. So the CDK is going to be a Node.js module. What it does is it creates a scaffolding project for you, where you have multiple files, multiple classes, if you want to use that. And you actually create a program that describes your infrastructure. To do that, you need to execute what is called construct. So construct, which are on 3 levels inside CDK, they are actually objects that represent one or a combination of services inside AWS. Then the next step is the synthesize. So behind everything, AWS work with CloudFormation, which is a YAML/JSON declarative way to create infrastructure. But CDK keep the abstraction level for you. So what happened is you create your JavaScript declaration of the project, and then with the synthesize, CDK will create for you a CloudFormation. The advantage of that is that with probably 3 or 4 lines of JavaScript, you may end up with 100 lines of YAML created in CloudFormation. So you really become productive. And also, if you do iteration on your infrastructure, it's a lot easier to go through your infrastructure code and try to modify or to understand what is going on. And then the deployment is leveraging the AWS CloudFormation. So CloudFormation is a way to create services in AWS, but group them all together. Let's make the example of I have a virtual machine, let's see, 2 virtual machines, a load balancer, a DNS, and a database. And all of it comes out as a CloudFormation, something that we call stack. So they're all together so that if you want, for example, destroy all these resources, you just destroy the stack. And then AWS knows how to use a specific sequence of steps to destroy the permission and everything around that stack. So that's the same logic used by CDK. When you create a project in CDK, in reality, you create one or more stack, you group resources together, and then you deploy these resources as a group of objects. There are a few commands. So after you install CDK in your development environment, you have certain steps to execute. So the first one, which is always like the one that I see that many people forget about it. So CloudFormation works in the assumption that you have a storage on AWS that contain all the scripts that you want to execute. That storage in AWS is called S3 bucket, is an object storage. So when you start a new CDK project, you probably have an AWS account. Within that account, you must have at least one S3 bucket designated for CloudFormation, in this case for CDK. So you need an S3 bucket where you say, hey, I have those bunch of scripts. Can you run it for me and create resources? If you don't do that part, you can create a CDK project, but then you will end up in some errors when you try to deploy, because in reality, CDK on your computer does not know where to deploy those assets. So that command is called CDK bootstraps. And what it does, actually, it looks at your credential. It will go to the AWS account that you have configured in your machine or in your terminal or in your CI/CD pipeline. And what it will do is it will create an S3 bucket. It is an atomic step. So if you have the S3 bucket designated already, if you run CDK bootstrap one more time, nothing happened. CDK will look at the AWS account, we see, okay, I have an S3 bucket, so I will not create a new one. But it's fundamental. So often the 101 error for people approaching CDK is you didn't bootstrap your CDK. So there is nothing in the AWS account that can be leveraged to deploy your stack. Then the second one is CDK init. So init, actually, you are saying to CDK, in the folder where I am, I want to create a project. You have different type of project. For this demo, we create a project called app. So a project called app in reality is an infrastructure as code. So a set of resources that you want to deploy into your AWS account. You can also create level 3 construct. So you can create like patterns that you can distribute across the company, or you can use some of the sample app that CDK provide you so that you can create, for example, a complex stack, taking an example so that you can see how you can structure the code around it. At that point, you have your project, you have your scaffolding. So you have your files, your scripts that describe the infrastructure, and you have 2 options here. So the CDK synthesize, as I showed in the previous slide, what it does, it print out the CloudFormation for various reasons. Let's say that you want to inspect the CloudFormation. Let's say that you need to provide CloudFormation template, but you don't want to go through YAML. So what you can do, you can create your CDK project in JavaScript. You go through with JavaScript, and then with CDK synthesize, you output a CloudFormation that you can give to another team. That's one option. If you do deployment, you can do deployment with CDK, and the command is called CDK deploy. So what happened with CDK deploy, behind the hood, CDK is actually calling the command synthesize for you. So you create the synthesize, he has the CloudFormation, he has the assets of the CloudFormation, and then he execute a CloudFormation deployment behind the hood for you. Finally, you can use CDK destroy, which is the command to destroy the whole stack. I will show you through the demo. You have to be a little careful because certain objects, for example, a database or an S3 bucket, they have some options which will not be deleted if they have objects inside. So if you want to go into a CI/CD flavor where you want to create the infrastructure, deploy your code, run some integration tests, and destroy everything, you need to be sure that those resources in CDK, they are flagged to be destroyable. Otherwise, if they have some content in there, like data or objects or media file, then the CDK will not delete the object. There are a few other commands that you can look at the CDK documentation. I think one that it's worth mentioning, it's called CDK diff with double F, which is mean difference. And this is used to actually inspect your AWS account compared to the code that you are writing. For example, you are on first iteration, you deploy the infrastructure. Now you do a second iteration because someone asked you to modify the infrastructure. And then before hitting the account, even if it's a low-level account, you want to be sure, like, hey, what is going to happen here? What are the differences? Then you can run CDK diff, and what CDK will do, actually, we look at the change set. So it will inspect your AWS account CloudFormation stack, it will look at your code, and it will show you, hey, these resources are going to change. Then last part is the construct. So CDK is a library, and it starts with the low-level L1 construct, something that we don't use, right? It's not something that you want to go here. It's what I call the dungeon. You don't want to go into the dungeon and actually leverage the L1 construct, but you need to be aware that they are there. So the L1 construct, they are a mapping of one-to-one to a service in AWS. That can be a security policy, can be a service like an S3 bucket, or can be a virtual machine. So the L1 construct is a library that is constantly updated by AWS. So that's why you have many versions of CDK. And actually is an object that represents a service in AWS with all the parameters necessary to create that object. So as you can imagine, if we talk about virtual machine, an EC2 level 1 construct will end up having 20, 30, 40 parameters, which is not what you need. So then CDK give you a second level of abstraction, which is called L2 construct. And the L2 construct is what I call the human-friendly object. So it is more syntactic sugar. You can create object with probably 1-2 parameters, and all the necessary parameters are hidden behind with default value, but you can interact with them if you need to. While with the level 1 construct, you really need to go deep diving into the old parameters because it's the core object that creates a service. On top of it, the last one is the level 3 construct. So AWS gives you some patterns, but you as an organization, you can create patterns because maybe in your company, you have specific requirement where you want to deploy an application. So you need a specific infrastructure design. You need a specific network set of rules, right? So you can have L3 construct. And in there, what you do actually, you don't create anymore a single resource. You create a bunch of them, you connect them all together, but you abstract further the creation. So you can have an object, like in this case, called application load balancer EC2 service, which is very self-explanatory. So here, with one with 2 lines of code, I create a bunch of EC2 virtual machine. I put an application load balancer on top. So probably I also have some sort of HTTP server within the EC2 to host my web application. And all it's done with 2 lines of code. So very easy, especially for developers that want to do a quick iteration. They want to create infrastructure. They don't want to learn everything about AWS infrastructure. The company gives them some L3 construct that they can be used to actually create those resources. So these are the 3 levels, L1, L2, L3. Most of the time you will work with level 2. Then when you get confident, that's my advice, when you are confident with level 2, you can start to look at the level 3 construct that exists already, and you can think of, if you want to invest time in creating level 3 construct. So the level 3 construct, the need is you want to recycle, right? So you want to have an infrastructure that is recycled across team. Otherwise, you can stay with the level 2 construct. So now, demo time. I will switch to my Visual Studio. I have a couple of projects. So one is an empty project, and for the Murphy law, if anything goes wrong, I have a project that I know it's working and has been tested already. All right, so I am inside my CDK project. As you can see, it's fully empty. I don't have anything. In this case, I am inside an AWS account already. Just to be sure, I will do my 2FA authentication. So let me log in quickly into my account. So I'm in there, but I have no project. So the first step is I want to create a new project. So I can do that. Let me just go back here, and I will say CDK init what? An application. I want to init an application. And in this case, I want to use TypeScript. I want to use TypeScript for a couple of reasons. It's type safe, so I avoid that bunch of problems that JavaScript give me, because TypeScript will let me know that I have a problem even before I get started. So TypeScript. Now, in this case, I use TypeScript, so of course, CDK is going to execute some Node.js script in the background. And let it just run for a second. All right, so let's look a bit what happened here. So first of all, we get some information from CDK, say like, hey, welcome, you choose TypeScript, blah, blah, blah. And then it's telling me, look, there is a file called cdk.json that tells the CDK toolkit how to execute your app. So now we know that the first file that we have to look at is called cdk.json, which is this one. And now, if you're a bit familiar here, here is a mix of like Bash and TypeScript. So here it's using npx. So npx it's part of npm packaging, and it's say to execute actually this file called cdk-test01.ts. So now I know that this is my entry point. So it's cdk-test01.ts. And then he told me, hey, look, because you choose to use TypeScript, you have to do a few more things than just CDK deploy or CDK synthesize. It's telling me you need to do npm run build if you want to compile your TypeScript into JavaScript. You can write unit tests. So for example, you can put unit tests saying every S3 bucket inside the stack should have versioning enabled. So if someone has come into your stack and say, create an S3 bucket, but I don't want version, then the unit test will fail. And in your pipeline, you can say, if the unit test fail, don't deploy the CDK. And you can do more commands. So now we can try. It may fail this. I have another project that run because I have some misconfiguration, but it's just to show you, right? So in this case, I will do npm run build. So now what it's doing is compiling TypeScript into JavaScript, and I got lucky, it worked. So now we say my entry point is cdk test01.ts, which is inside the bin folder, you know, from here. So if we look at the scaffolding, you have the bin folder where you will put all your JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, you name it, files that describe the infrastructure. Then you have the folder library because you want to have additional resources. Example, I create a virtual machine and I want to execute a bash file when the virtual machine is created. Why? Because I want to register the virtual machine inside my LDAP. Or I create a Lambda function that executes some Python code. So if I create the Lambda function, somewhere I need to provide a file.py, which is the code of the Lambda. So that's where you will put it. You will put it in the lib folder. And other resources. For example, you want to have, just last one, a cognito authentication, but you want to use the company logo in the login page. So when you create it with CDK, then you say, hey, configure cognito to have the login screen coming from this picture. Now, let's look at my TS. In this case, because we use TypeScript, you will see that after you run npm run build for the first time, you will end up having the same file.js and the same file.d.ts. So if you are familiar with TypeScript, what happened here, in reality, you don't execute TypeScript. TypeScript is an abstraction level for JavaScript. So at the end of the day, you need to output a JavaScript file. That's what is doing npm run build. Now I can go into my TypeScript file. This is how CDK give it to me as a starting point. I will delete everything and I will show you a bit what we can do. So we start with a very simple infrastructure here. So the first part that I have is I don't need this part here. I have my CDK library, and then I want maybe to import a construct. So I can say import construct from AWS CDK library. And then maybe I want to use the construct for S3. All right, but let me comment for now. So then there are multiple ways here to use TypeScript. This is a bit like a different way. I like to create object-oriented programs also when I create my infrastructure. So I can create a class in TypeScript, which is very similar to what you do in React, for example, if you want to create a web component. So in this case, I will start with like export class. I will call my class somehow. So I can say CDK test01 to match the project. And then I can extend CDK stack. So a CDK stack is a CloudFormation stack. And now here, it's my infrastructure. Then I have, it's a class. So I have a constructor, and the constructor wants a scope. He wants an ID. And he wants some not mandatory property, like this. And then inside here, I can do my infrastructure. In this case, for TypeScript, I'm using super because what happened is I extend the class. So I need to actually call the base constructor of the class. And last one here, now I can use it like this. Sorry. Voila. So now I have my basic stack, but it doesn't have any resource. I can try to compile these things. But it has nothing. So if you want, you can inspect the JavaScript created, and you can see it's creating a CloudFormation stack empty. So then we can start to say, well, I want an S3 bucket. So I can create objects, and I would say var S3 is equal to CDK because I import the entire library. That's one way of doing it. And then I can say that I want to create an EWS S3 bucket. Now, when I open the parentheses, I have to give a context. So I want it into this stack here. I want to give it a name. So in this case is CDK test 01 buckets. And then I can additionally give some properties. Right, so let me just triple check my code. Yeah, I forgot, so I create new. All right, now here, if I do on, 1 second. So on my Mac, I do control space. Probably if you use Windows, it's slightly different. So now here, you can customize it. So you see here, the question mark in TypeScript means I have a default value. If you want, you can give me an additional value. And what you can do is you can, set parameters into the S3 buckets. So in this case, for example, I want to say the versioning of the bucket is equal false. All right. So now my expectation is I have nothing inside my AWS account. If I run this piece of code, what happened is I'm expecting to find an S3 bucket called CDK test 01 buckets. So first of all, I will do an npm run build. And inside the JavaScript now, you see I have my JavaScript version of the CDK. So it has been transpiled correctly. Then I can try CDK synthesize. So let me see what is going to be the CloudFormation of this. Yes, anyway, it would give me an error because I have an issue with my terminal. So I have another stack that it's identical actually, which is here. So this one worked, at least it did this morning. So let me synthesize this. All right, so now look, this is actually the CloudFormation that you probably may need to create in this case is in YAML to create an S3 bucket. Yeah, all right, now here, what happened is CDK will add all additional metadata, it will add all additional default parameters that maybe they are not necessary when you use CloudFormation, but this is just to give you the example of agility, right? So look how different is the output between three, 4 lines of TypeScript and this one. Now, I will do like this. I want to delete everything. So I want to create a bucket called CDK bucket in a stack called CDK speak stack. So let's go back here. And the command to do that is CDK deploy. So I run it. So CDK deploy now, remember the workflow. We create a CloudFormation behind the hood. We'll contact your AWS account. And then we say, hey, I have this stack to deploy. Now it's transpiling and compiling for me everything. And now before the submission, CDK will ask me if I want to hit my AWS account and create a resource. So it's creating, you see a CloudFormation change set. And in this case, it didn't ask me because I think I said yes previously this morning to this stack. So now you go ahead. And here I can monitor the steps. So you see I have creation in progress, is doing a CloudFormation stack, is doing an S3 bucket. At the same time, if you want, you can go into your AWS account, like I have it here, and you see, here is my stack. All right, creation was already done in the meantime, but you see it's called CDK speak stack, which is the same code that I use in TypeScript. And actually, if I look at the resources, I have some metadata and a CDK bucket. And the CDK bucket has the name CDK bucket plus something else that has been done by CDK for me. All right, then I can go into my bucket and I say to the bucket that I don't want versioning. So let's go into properties. And if I go into bucket versioning, it's a disable. All right. Then I go back to my Visual Studio here. And then I want to say that version A has to be true, but I will not do a deployment. First of all, I want to ask CDK, hey, is there any difference with what I have in production inside my account? I do CDK diff. See if it works. It should tell me that something happened. All right, so he found the stack in CloudFormation, and voila, he's telling me, hey, Raf, you change the CDK bucket, so the S3 bucket, and you are changing the property status to enable for versioning configuration. All right, so now I know what I'm doing here. I can deploy, so I would say CDK deploy. Now we are going through the same step again, synthesize, create a CloudFormation, create a change set in the stack, deploy the change set. Now it's doing the old deployment. Just awkward silence. All right, so update is in progress. It's changing my bucket. So let me go in here. Let me refresh my stack. You see, it's telling me, hey, there is an update ongoing here. And you can even look at the change set, and it's telling me now, my AWS account, hey, there is a change that's triggered here, has been triggered by this CloudFormation, which is CDK deploy change set. Now let's give it a second because I'm enabling. All right, so it's completed. So that means that here is say bucket versioning disable. So I'm expecting that I refresh the page and I see bucket versioning enable. Let's see if I'm right. Yes, bucket versioning enable. And all this boiled down to, I mean, if you want to count also the initialization here, but it's really like 3 lines of code for me because I use TypeScript, so I like indentation. Maybe in Python, this is 1 line of code, done. Then some extra things. I am wise on time, so I want to also give you another couple of extra information. Very important, when you use CDK, always think about the removal policy. So removal policy, then you can use an enumeration from CDK. And here it's fundamental. So you see with CDK is actually showing you the option. So what is removal policy? For certain object like S3 in AWS, even if you tell the AWS account, hey, delete the S3 service, it won't do it if there are inside files. Because can you imagine, by mistake, someone go into the AWS account, there is an S3 bucket with files, and you click delete on the bucket, and all the files are gone, right? So there is the removal policy that by default, it is not destroyed, it is retained. So in this case, if I upload a file in the S3 bucket, and then I say CDK destroy, that CDK will not do it because I have files in there. So if I'm going into CI/CD pipeline where I want to provide infrastructure on the fly, test my code and destroy it, then always remember removal policy if you plan to upload data inside your services in AWS. Otherwise, CDK cannot destroy it. So I can do like this. And then again, I can do CDK diff just for the sake of it. Let's do it. So now again, synthesize, and this is slightly slower because I am using TypeScript. So I have an extra step behind the hood where TypeScript need to be transpiled into JavaScript. If you use native JavaScript or you use Python, it's slightly faster because you don't have to transpile anything. So the code that you write is the one that goes straight into the CDK command line. I have 2 minutes. So this is done. Now, what I will do is I remove this. And always, when you are on cloud, remember, destroy your resources if you don't need it. It doesn't matter what, they don't run for free for you. So in here, now I will go back to my CloudFormation. I have my stack. I am done with my development. I'm done with my POC, whatever you're doing. So I will go here, it's CDK, destroy, run it. Let's see what happened. Now the UI will update quickly. Just give it a second. Oh, I think I have a confirmation. Yeah, so he's asking me, hey, are you sure? I'm going to destroy the whole stack that you created. Yes, go ahead, please. All right. And now it's starting. So you see, delete in progress. You can look at the events. So what it's trying to do, it tried to delete the metadata first, and then he deletes the buckets. So that's going to happen. I enable versioning, so the deletion should take a little bit longer on the S3 bucket, but it's done. All right, so now it's done. And as you can see in the active stack, I have nothing. All right, so let's go here. It's my bucket. I should get an error now because this bucket is gone, right? So if I go into here, it's not gone. Why it's not gone? Because when I originally created, I didn't have the option of removal policy. So the CDK is done, but it didn't delete the S3 bucket. So you see, very careful when you do this part. Remember, removal policy is fundamental. All right, so now I am done. Very quickly, to any of you, if you want, you can take a picture of this QR code. And there are really like 3 questions that help me to understand how is the session. You can just go there, rate the session, and let me know. There is also rating inside the DevOps Pro platform, which really helped me to understand if I'm delivering the content correctly. All right, and then I think now we will start a Q&A.
Hey, Raf. Great educational talk there. Loved listening to it the whole way through. Guys, if you do have questions for Raf, obviously you can contact him later via this. But if you're here in the moment, why not take advantage of the moment? We do have our Q&A section now, so be sure to type them out in the chat. There's a tab for that. I'll relay any questions you guys have across to Raf. First of all, kind of opening up, I think a good kind of pitch for the product, right, is there's definitely alternatives in the market, right? There are things that can do similar things. What's the big edge with CDK compared to your competitors, and what competitors have you taken note of?
All right. So CDK is AWS. So that's fundamental. You are not going to use CDK to output Azure ARM, right? That's not possible. So that's a fundamental part. Secondly is, let's say that you are on AWS. Otherwise, we go into kind of a dungeon topic that I don't like. So if you are on AWS, actually you have, the way I see the customers, majority of the customers are on AWS tools or they use Terraform. Then there are a lot of other tools on the market, but these are the big players. If you are on Terraform, what is the advantage? Terraform is YAML. So you cannot create a for loop and say in the for loop, create 1,000 virtual machine or 1,000 EKS cluster, and then parameterize all the creation. You just can't do it. You need to start to play with Bash, Terraform modules, Terraform services. It's very complicated. In CDK, it's 4 lines of code. For each loop, you take beginning and end of the loop and 2 lines of loop of code inside to create as many Kubernetes node or classes you need to create. So that's one takeaway. The second one is it's one of the most active development kit in AWS. So it's really up to date constantly. And now there is also an open source project. So if you go on GitHub, it's not AWS, but there are many open source projects now where you use CDK, but you output Terraform. You use CDK, but you output something else, right? So people are getting enthusiastic about. And then the last part, it's with all the tools of AWS, I think this one is probably, really switching the mindset of, I'm a developer now. I don't need to learn anything. I'm using my knowledge to now be an infrastructure guy. So that's probably
Yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of saying like the big edge it has over the other tools that are already there is it's kind of this midpoint, right? Like you spend less time on the tedious elements, the kind of thing, the simple stuff that you have to learn when you go into a code base. Instead, you spend a lot more time creating the big picture elements, right? Actually getting to what you want to create. Okay, that's fair. I think we are running out of time. It looks like the Q&A section is a little bit quiet at the moment, which is fine. I'm just going to put this back up on screen if they want to get in contact with you. Raf?
Yeah, you can send me an email. You can go through this QR code, and then there is a text field at the bottom. Ask anything. In AWS, we are always happy to answer questions, especially me. So don't worry, you're not a customer yet. You are just a developer. Send me an email. I always answer within human time. Okay, so I always answer. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so very happy if any of you has questions.
Notice you said yeah, because Raf, as I can tell, is a very charismatic person. I'm sure he'll convert you across. Raf, I think that's all we've got time for. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a very educational piece.
Thank you for the opportunity, and you have a good day, all of you.
You too. Thanks, folks.
Bye.
This is all we got. Remember the revolution in our minds. This is all we got.
Lock me out of this life institution. I am angry and high on illusions. Yes, I hate, but it's not a solution. Try my best, but I'm just a human. Oh, we don't need to say we're sorry. We don't need to worship ever stars. We don't need to say